In this lecture, we are going to discuss vendors and the CCPA, or California Consumer Privacy Act. We will begin by defining at a very high level what the CCPA is. We will then look at the term selling, and specifically selling to data vendors. We will then look at consumer rights and business obligations under the CCPA, as well as disclosures to service providers, persons, and third parties. And we will conclude with a brief discussion on data types under the CCPA. So what is the CCPA? CCPA stands for California Consumer Privacy Act, and this was enacted in 2018. It was most recently amended by the California Privacy Rights Act, or CPRA, in 2020 to really confuse things with all of these CP acronyms. The CCPA is enforced by the California Attorney General and the California Privacy Protection Agency, or CPPA. So the CCPA was amended by the CPR and is enforced by the CPPA. The CCPA provides rights to California residents and it imposes obligations on businesses. Under the CCPA, what does sale mean? Well, sale means quite a lot, so this is important to note. A sale, within the context of selling data to vendors, for example, means selling, renting, releasing, disclosing, disseminating, making available, transferring, or otherwise communicating a consumer's PII to another business or third party for monetary or other valuable consideration. It's important to note that this is exchange of PII, not just for cash, but for anything else of value. And right now I'm thinking specifically of that episode of The Office where Meredith gets free office supply vouchers for... I'll leave it there. If you're an Office fan, I think you know what I'm talking about. So sale doesn't have to be just for money. It includes sharing without monetary exchange. There are numerous consumer rights under the CCPA and CPRA. What you need to know for the CIPM is as follows. Consumers have the right to know, for example, to which other parties their data has been disclosed. They have the right to opt out, and they have the right to delete or to request deletion of their data. With regards to business obligations, there are, again, 3 that you need to know for the exam. Businesses must provide notice and disclosure, for example, of the data collected and the collection purpose. If the data has been sold, they must provide notice of what data has been sold and to whom. Businesses must provide an opt-out mechanism, for example, to opt out of the sale of an individual's data. And businesses must also include contractual requirements. Specifically, businesses must ensure that contracts prohibit sale. And in contracts with vendors, organizations must specify the business purpose for which information is used. So again, we're looking at this business obligation, these contractual requirements, within the context of vendors. We're now going to look at what the CCPA has to say about disclosures to service providers, persons, and third parties. Concerning service providers, a contract must limit processing to the specified business purpose. With regards to disclosures to persons, the contract must prohibit persons from selling, maintaining, or otherwise processing data outside of the direct business relationship. And with regards to third parties, let's first define what a third party is. Under the CCPA, a third party is any person or entity that is not the business that collects PII directly from the consumer and is not a service provider or contractor to whom the business discloses data for a business purpose pursuant to a written contract. Now, concerning third parties under the CCPA, third parties must have a separate, independent use for the data. This use must be confirmed in contracts or service agreements, and the primary organization must know all parties and obligations involved. Finally, there are 2 data types you need to know about for the exam. They include aggregate consumer information and de-identified data. Aggregate consumer information under the CCPA is information that relates to a group or category of consumers. Under this type of information, individual consumer identities have been removed, and the data is not reasonably linked to any consumer or household. So again, as the name suggests, this is aggregate consumer data. Finally, de-identified data is data that cannot reasonably identify, relate to, or describe a particular consumer. And when in possession of de-identified data, businesses must prevent and prohibit the re-identification of this data. And so, for example, if an organization is handing over a de-identified data set to a vendor or a contractor, then the contract must state that the processor, again, the third party or vendor, is prohibited from attempting to re-identify the de-identified data set. In this lecture, we have discussed vendors under the CCPA. I won't go through all of the acronyms here, but make sure you have those straight before you get to the exam. You should know all three of these, the CCPA, the CPRA, and the CPPA. Remember that the CCPA provides rights to California residents and imposes obligations on businesses. Remember that sale under the CCPA is the exchange of PII for monetary or other valuable consideration. The primary consumer rights that you need to remember for the exam under the CCPA are the right to know which other parties an organization has disclosed consumer data to, the right to opt out, as well as the right to delete. Business obligations include notice and disclosure, an opt-out mechanism, and contractual requirements. For the exam, you also need to know the terms service providers, persons, and third parties, and what the disclosure requirements and limitations are for those three entities. And finally, you should also be familiar with the terms aggregate consumer information and de-identified data.